The champagne was still cold when Jacob Holt leaned over my shoulder and said those words I'd been hearing in different forms my entire life. "You got lucky, Kevin. Nothing more." I remember the way the room smelled. Gardenias from the centerpieces my Aunt Denise insisted on. My co-worker Casey's perfume cutting through the air. The faint musk of 30 people packed into Mama's living room on a Tuesday night. All of it frozen in that one suffocating second. I was 29 years old. I had just been promoted to Regional Director of Operations at Caldwell Briggs Logistics, the youngest black man in company history to hold that title. My direct report was 15 people. My salary jumped from $67,000 to $114,000 overnight. I had worked 6 years, 14-hour days, missed vacations, skipped weekends, cancelled dates, all for that moment. And Jacob Holt, the man who married my mother when I was 11 years old, stood in the middle of my celebration with a red Solo cup in his hand and reduced everything I'd built to luck. I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I did something that scared even me. I smiled, set down my own cup, and said, "You're probably right, Jacob." Then I walked out of my own party. Nobody saw it coming. Not Mama. Not my best friend Jackson. Not Jacob himself, who laughed like I'd agreed with a joke. But I wasn't agreeing. I was deciding. See, Jacob had been leaning on me financially for almost 2 years by that point. Quietly, strategically, and completely deliberately. And that night, something cold and clear locked into place inside my chest. The game was about to change. Let me tell you who Jacob Holt really was, because the version my mother fell in love with and the version I grew up under were two completely different men. My mother, Carol Jean Lester, met Jacob at a church fundraiser in the spring of 2005. She was a widow with an 11-year-old son, working double shifts at Mercy General as a nurse's aide. My biological father, Kevin Sr., had died of a heart attack 3 years earlier, and Mama was still putting herself back together, piece by piece, prayer by prayer. Jacob showed up polished. Dark suit. Smooth talk. A job at the City Water Authority that paid decent and came with a pension. He brought flowers to the house twice before he even asked her on a proper date. He called me little man and took me to a Hawks game that first summer. I wanted to like him. I really did. But by the time I was 14, the mask had started slipping. Jacob didn't yell. That wasn't his style. His cruelty was quieter, a raised eyebrow when I brought home a B+ instead of an A. A slow, deliberate silence when I talked about my dreams. Once, when I told him I wanted to study business, he looked at me over his newspaper and said, "That's a white man's field, Kevin. Don't embarrass yourself." Mama never heard that part. She was always somewhere else when Jacob said the things that mattered most, the things that burrowed into a teenage boy's chest and lived there rent-free for years. I left for college at 18 and told myself I was done with Jacob Holt. But toxic roots have a way of following you home. I came back to Atlanta at 23 with a degree in supply chain management and a hunger that no amount of Jacob's doubt could touch. I landed a junior analyst role at Caldwell Briggs, found a one-bedroom in East Point, and started building something real. For 3 years, I barely went home. Christmas. Easter. That was it. Then Mama got sick. It wasn't life-threatening, a stress fracture in her hip that required surgery and 6 weeks of recovery, but it was enough to pull me back in. I moved back temporarily, sleeping in my old room that still smelled like Axe body spray and ambition. I cooked. I drove her to physical therapy. I handled her medical bills when insurance played games. Jacob was around, but Jacob was Jacob. He'd pat her hand and then disappear into the garage to work on his truck, which meant sitting in a lawn chair listening to sports radio for 4 hours. That was the first time I noticed the financial situation. Mama whispered it to me one evening while Jacob was outside. "Baby, we're a little behind on the second mortgage." Her eyes were ashamed. She was 61 years old and ashamed of something that wasn't her fault. I looked at the bills. Jacob had refinanced the house in 2019, without discussing it with Mama, to fund a business venture with his buddy Earl that went nowhere. They were $14,000 behind. I paid it. All of it. One wire transfer. Jacob found out 2 days later. He didn't say thank you. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just nodded slowly and said, "House is square now." That was the beginning of the arrangement. And I was the only one who didn't know I'd signed up for it. Here's what nobody tells you about being the successful one in a toxic family. There's a tax. Not the kind you file in April. The invisible kind. The one that gets collected in small amounts over time until one day you look up and realize you've been funding someone else's comfort while they undermine your confidence. After the mortgage situation, Jacob started calling more. Not to check on me. Jacob never called to check on me. He called with things. Small things at first. "Kevin, your mama's car needs new brakes. You know how to find a good deal." Then medium things. "That vac unit finally gave out. Son, it's looking like $3,200. Son. He called me son when he needed something. I told myself I was doing it for mama. And I was. But I was also doing it because I didn't have the language yet for what Jacob was actually doing. He had studied me for 18 years. He knew exactly which emotional lever to pull. My co-worker Casey, smart, no-nonsense Casey who grew up in Bankhead and had seen every version of family manipulation, said it plainly when I told her about the vac bill over lunch one day. "Kevin," she said, setting down her fork, "that man is farming you." I laughed. I actually laughed. "I'm serious," she said. "He plants doubt in you so you stay hungry to prove yourself. Then he positions your mama as the harvest. Every time you pay something, you think you're being a good son. But he's the one cashing in." I drove home that night with Casey's words sitting in my passenger seat. I still didn't fully believe her. Not yet. Let me tell you what 6 years of ambition looks like from the inside. It looks like your alarm going off at 5:15 a.m. every single day. It looks like eating a sad desk lunch while running inventory reports. It looks like passing on your friend Jackson's birthday trip to Miami because you had a quarterly review the following Monday and you needed to be sharp. It looks like sacrifice that nobody sees and nobody celebrates, except the results. By the time I hit year 4 at Caldwell Briggs, I had restructured our Southeast distribution workflow and saved the company $2.1 million in annual overhead. My supervisor, Director Pamela Knox, brilliant woman, former Army logistics officer, wrote in my review, "Kevin Lester is the most operationally instinctive analyst I have managed in 22 years. His ceiling is executive level." I kept that review in a folder on my desktop. On bad days, I read it twice. Year 5, I was promoted to Senior Operations Manager. Year 6, the Regional Director position opened up, and Pamela called me into her office personally. "Kevin, this one's yours if you want it," she said. "But I need to know you're ready to own it completely. No hesitation. No imposter syndrome. You earned this." I thought about Jacob's voice. "You got lucky. That's a white man's field. Don't embarrass yourself." "I'm ready," I said. And I meant it down to my bones. The promotion was announced on a Thursday. Mama planned the party for the following Tuesday. She invited family, co-workers, neighbors, church folks. She bought a cake with gold lettering that said Regional Director Lester. She was so proud. That memory still wrecks me. Tuesday came the way big nights always do, too fast and louder than expected. Mama had the house looking immaculate. Aunt Denise and her husband Calvin were there early, arranging tables. My cousin Brianna kept screaming, "That's my cousin," at everyone who walked through the door. Jackson showed up with a bottle of Clay Sozul and a handshake that turned into a hug. Casey came with her boyfriend Owen. Pamela Knox came, which surprised me and touched me more than I showed. Even a few of the guys from the warehouse floor drove up from Macon because Mama had called and personally invited them. It was everything a celebration should be. Jacob arrived 40 minutes late in a pressed shirt, smelling like polo cologne and entitlement. He shook a few hands, made a few jokes, ate 2 plates. I watched him work the room and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pity. Not for me. For him. Because Jacob Holt was surrounded by evidence of everything he tried to convince me I couldn't become, and all he could do was smile through it like a man who'd lost a bet and was pretending he hadn't. Then he came to me. The room was loud. The music was low. Mama had a Quiet Storm playlist going. Jacob stepped close, the way he always did when he wanted to say something that only I would hear. Regional director. He said it slow, like he was tasting something sour. You know how it goes. Right place, right time. You got lucky, Kevin. Nothing more. The room kept moving. The music kept playing. Brianna was laughing at something across the room. I felt 18 years of his voice dissolve into one clean, quiet decision. You're probably right, Jacob, I said. I set down my cup. I hugged Mama. And I left. I drove to Jackson's apartment in Decatur and sat on his balcony for 2 hours without saying much. He didn't push. That's why Jackson has been my best friend since 7th grade. He knows when to pour the drink and when to wait. Finally, around midnight, I talked. I told him everything. The mortgage. The HVAC. The constant small requests. Cases farming comment. The 18 years of quiet erosion. And the moment at the party. Jackson was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to stop," I said. "Stop what?" "All of it." I stared at the Atlanta skyline, distant and glittering. The payments. The access. All of it. Jackson leaned forward. "Kevin, you're Mama." "Mama is not Jacob," I cut in. "What I'm about to do has nothing to do with Mama." That's when I told him the part one hadn't told anyone yet. The part that changed everything. For the past 18 months, I had been listed as a co-manager on Jacob's retirement account, a favor I'd agreed to when he claimed he was no good with online banking and needed help monitoring the account. His pension from the city was separate. This was a personal investment account worth approximately $46,000. Jacob had given me full management access. He'd signed the paperwork himself. He'd handed me the keys to his safety net and then stood in the middle of my celebration and told me I didn't deserve mine. Jackson looked at me for a long, silent moment. "Kevin," he said carefully, "what exactly are you thinking?" I looked at him. "I'm thinking Jacob is about to have a very educational experience. Let me be precise about what I did, because this story is not about stealing. It was never about stealing. Jacob's retirement account had sat essentially untouched since I gained access. He checked the balance maybe twice a year, always texting me, "Balance look right." And I'd confirm. That was the extent of his financial awareness. What I did was remove myself. I called the brokerage the morning after the party. I told them I needed to be removed as co-manager. Standard procedure. 15-minute call. Done. Then I called the bank where the automatic monthly transfer originated, a $400 contribution Jacob had set up from a joint account he shared with Mama. Except Mama had told me privately 3 months earlier that Jacob had quietly removed her name from that account after a disagreement. It was his account now, which meant that $400 every month was feeding a fund that he alone controlled. I had been monitoring that account too, because Jacob had also, very casually, added me as a secondary contact on it for emergency purposes. I removed myself from that one too. Then I called Mama's personal attorney, Mr. Alvin Stewart, a man who'd handled our family's legal affairs for 15 years, a quiet giant of a man who wore bow ties and knew where every body was buried in Atlanta's financial landscape. "Mr. Stewart," I said, "I need to understand exactly what protections my mother has if Jacob were to suddenly become financially unstable." There was a pause on the line. "Son," he said slowly, "I think it's time we had a full conversation." What he told me next made my blood run cold. Alvin Stewart had not gotten to 63 years of practicing law by being slow. When I told him about the second mortgage Jacob had refinanced without Mama's full understanding, when I laid out the timeline of the financial requests, when I mentioned the account from which Mama's name had been quietly removed, he was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then he asked me to send him everything. I sent him everything. 3 days later, he called me back. "Kevin." His voice was steady but heavy. "Your mother signed documents in 2019 that she may not have fully understood. The refinancing was legal. Barely. But there are 2 additional credit accounts opened in her name that she appears to have no knowledge of. Combined balance of $18,400. I gripped my steering wheel. Furthermore, he continued, Jacob has been listed as beneficiary on a life insurance policy your mother took out in 2007, originally listing you as primary beneficiary. That designation was changed in 2021. Was Mama aware of that change? Silence. The signature on the change form is hers. Whether she understood what she was signing is another question. I sat in a Kroger parking lot in Decatur and let the full weight of Jacob Holt land on me all at once. This was not a man who was careless with money. This was a man who was strategic with it. Every move he'd made was designed to isolate my mother financially, to extract value from me emotionally and economically, and to secure himself at everyone else's expense. And he'd done it all while making me feel like I was the one who needed to prove something. I called Mama that night. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. But I told her enough. Mama, I said quietly, I need you to come stay with me for a little while. She resisted at first. That's Carol Jean Lester for you. She spent her whole life absorbing other people's weight and calling it love. She told me Jacob would be upset. She told me the house needed watching. She told me she was fine. Mama, I said, Mr. Stewart found 2 credit cards in your name you didn't know about. Dead silence. $18,000, Mama. I heard her breath change. That specific sound, the one where a woman realizes the story she's been living and the story that's actually been happening are 2 different stories. It's one of the worst sounds in the world. She came over the next evening with a single rolling suitcase, wearing her good church coat even though it was just me. Like she needed the dignity of it. I made her red beans and rice because that's what she always made when things were hard. We sat at my kitchen table and Mr. Stewart walked her through every document on a video call. He was gentle. Patient. He explained things twice when she needed it and never once made her feel foolish. Jacob called 7 times that night. Mama didn't answer. I watched her stare at the phone each time it buzzed, and I watched her choose herself, slowly, one ignored call at a time. Then Jacob called me. I let it ring. He texted, Kevin, where is your mother? I stared at that text for a long time. No punctuation. No question mark. Just entitlement dressed up as a sentence. I typed back, she's safe. Then I put my phone face down and finished my dinner. Here's the thing about Jacob's retirement account that I haven't told you yet. When I removed myself as co-manager, Jacob lost the only person who had been actively monitoring that account. What neither of us had discussed was the fact that for the past 11 months, Jacob had been making unauthorized small withdrawals, $200 here, $300 there, from the account to cover personal expenses he hadn't disclosed to Mama. I had flagged those internally but said nothing, because I kept hoping I was wrong about him. I wasn't wrong. When Mr. Stewart subpoenaed the account records as part of building Mama's legal case, everything came out. Every withdrawal. Every undisclosed transaction. The brokerage flagged 2 of the withdrawals as potentially violating the account's own terms. Jacob had originally set it up as a protected retirement instrument with early withdrawal penalties and specific use restrictions. The brokerage froze the account pending review. Jacob found this out on a Thursday morning. He called me 23 times before noon. I answered on the 24th call. Kevin. His voice was something I had never heard before, thin, stripped of its usual weight. My account is frozen. I don't know what's happening. They're talking about penalties. I need you to. Jacob, I said calmly, I removed myself from your account the morning after my promotion party. Silence. I'm no longer a contact on any of your accounts. I can't help you with this. But I thought we. You told me I got lucky, I said. You were right. I got lucky that I finally understood who you were. I hung up. The account penalties and the legal review left Jacob's retirement fund in a position I hadn't engineered but couldn't say I mourned. He'd done it to himself. He'd handed me the shovel and dug his own hole. Jacob showed up at my apartment 3 days later. I saw him on the building's camera app. He stood outside the lobby door for 8 full minutes before buzzing. I let him stand there. Then I buzzed him up. Because I wanted to look him in the eye. Because I needed that moment the same way you need a scar to finally close. He looked older. Smaller. Somehow. Jacob Holt had always carried himself like a man who owned rooms. Standing in my hallway in a wrinkled polo shirt, he looked like a man who was finally standing in something he couldn't own. "I need to talk to you," he said. "I know," I said. "Come in." I didn't offer him a seat. I stood in the middle of my living room and waited. "I made mistakes," he started. "Jacob." My voice was quiet. "I'm not your priest. I'm not your therapist. And I am no longer your ATM." He flinched. Actually flinched. "What you did to my mother, the credit accounts, the insurance beneficiary, the mortgage, Mr. Stewart has it all documented. Mama is pursuing legal remedy. I'd strongly recommend you cooperate. Kevin, she's my wife. And she's my mother." I stepped forward one step. Just one. "And she is done." Jacob looked around my apartment. At the art on the walls I'd bought myself. The furniture I'd chosen. The life I had built on 6 years of early mornings and ignored doubt. "I just thought," he started, "that I got lucky." I said. He had nothing. Absolutely nothing. "You can see yourself out, Jacob." Mama filed for legal separation in November. Mr. Stewart moved quickly, and between the credit accounts, the insurance change, and the undisclosed withdrawals, Jacob's position was not strong. He settled. He had to. The house went to Mama, fully, cleanly, and the 2 fraudulent credit accounts were disputed and cleared from her record. Jacob moved in with his friend Earl. You remember Earl, the man Jacob had borrowed against Mama's house to fund a failed business with. I heard they were doing okay. I didn't check twice. Casey texted me a week after it was all settled. "I told you he was farming you." I sent back a single laughing emoji and then called her to actually say thank you, because she'd seen it before I could. Pamela Knox pulled me aside at work one afternoon and said, "I heard you've had a complicated few months personally. You've never once let it show at work. That's character, Kevin." I almost told her what happened. Instead I just said, I had a good example of what not to do. Turns out that's just as valuable. Jackson threw me a real celebration. Just 8 of us, rooftop in Midtown, good food, no speeches. He raised his glass and said, "To the man who never actually needed luck." I thought about Jacob's face in my hallway. I thought about Mama signing papers she didn't understand. I thought about a 14-year-old boy being told his dreams belonged to someone else. And I thought about how every morning at 5:15, I chose myself anyway. That's what lucky looks like. Not a moment. Not a promotion. Not revenge. It looks like waking up and choosing yourself, again and again and again, until the people who said you couldn't are standing in your hallway with nothing left to say.